Hay once said, I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless night of racism and war that the daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. Racism is a plague that has been affecting society for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. It has inspired countless acts of violence and inhumane treatment of those undeserving of it. After extensive research from multiple different sources, I feel confident saying that the root of racism is greed, not the tone of one's skin. In this speech, I will be looking at both the historical and biblical reasonings and what it is that must be done to change this unfortunate part of society. Throughout history, there have been many different situations pointing to greed as the leading cause of racism against those counted as others. One of the very first examples is the introduction of chattel slavery in the mid 15th century. According to the Liverpool Museum, chattel slavery was originally picked up by Portuguese and Spanish to meet the demands for labor by bringing in outside slave labor, most prominently from Africa. As demands for profit increased throughout the Americas and Caribbean, more slaves, mainly from Africa, were brought in to meet these demands through the transatlantic slave trade. Chattel slavery was mainly based on the idea that slaves were not people, but rather property that should be exploited. This mentality led to the idea of different and separate races. In his book, The Anti-Greed Gospel, Lully talks about the origins of the word race and how the idea of race was created to justify the inhumane actions taken against those being enslaved. In a more modern example of one of the leading ways of racism through greed, one can simply look at the treatment of African Americans throughout the Civil War or the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s. In the article titled The Color of Racism, professors at the University of Missouri mentioned how social movements of the South were heavily impacted by the white business owners' motivation for economic gain. This can be seen in the outcome of the Montgomery bus boycott that took place in 1955. As the boycott continued for nearly a year, the Montgomery bus company ended up losing an estimated 30,000 bus fares each day, according to the National Park Service titled The Montgomery Bus Boycott. This became too much of a loss for the Montgomery bus service, as they had to desegregate due to a number of factors, including economic suffering. Today, segregation no longer takes on a physical body, but is more hidden. It can be seen in the mainly Black schools rooted in poverty, compared to the mainly white schools that can be found in wealthy areas. It can be seen in the housing laws that make it hard for African Americans to buy good homes. It can be seen in the justice system and the unfair handing out of punishments to Black inmates compared to white inmates. While there are many secular signs that point to greed being the root of racism, this idea can also be found in biblical teachings. From these teachings, I will be examining the notion that greed is a powerful emotion, one that, if given into, will drastically change a person's outlook on life and human interaction. Throughout the New Testament, the idea that greed has a capacity for great harm is taught by both Jesus and his disciples. It is taught in Matthew 6:24 that no one can serve two masters, for either he shall hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. It becomes evident through Christ's teachings that when one decides to put their time and effort into gaining more money, they will lose the teachings of Christ, including how he calls all believers brothers and sisters, worthy of love and respect. When someone participates in acts of racism and lives a life full of greed, they stop living a Christian lifestyle, but rather what Scott Gittani from the Holy Post would describe as an anti-Christian lifestyle. This anti-Christian lifestyle would lead a person to value money over their brother or sister in Christ. This type of lifestyle could be seen in the plantation owners of the South and can now be seen in the political and financial leaders of our modern age. Although the problem of racism fueled by greed has been rooted in culture for a very long time, there are ways to combat it. In the podcast Off Kilter, the hosts talk about the need for economic change. As they call it, changing our current oppression economy to instead one of a liberation economy. One of the ways they suggest achieving this new economy is by giving African Americans and people of minorities safety nets, such as creating programs that will help provide the very basic needs for those struggling to get access to them. Another way to achieve this economy was suggested in The Color of Money. In this article, it was suggested that banks work to partner with schools and teach children good strategies for saving money. what to save money for, and how to constantly make good financial decisions when entering adulthood. Another solution for this problem can be found in the Gospels of the Bible. Within the Gospels, there are many instances where Jesus calls his followers to love their brother and sister, friends, and enemies. As Guy Chitani put it in his podcast, called The Holy Post, love is not just a feeling, but it is also an action. Jesus did not simply show his love for us through his words of comfort, but by his sacrifices he made. John the Apostle wrote in 1 John 3:16 through 17 that by this we know that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? This passage tells us that it is not enough to simply care, but we must take action. If we withhold any possession from our brothers and sisters that may be in lack, it would be as if we were withholding from God himself. In conclusion, through historical and biblical reasonings, it can be seen that greed is the root of racism, motivated by humankind's attempts to grow their wealth and status in the world. Racism appears in many different forms, although it may look different than it did 500 or even 50 years ago. There are ways to dismantle this cultural existence of racism, whether it be advocating for new government policies or reminding ourselves of the complete equality of every human. We can bring racism that is rooted in greed to an end. Furthermore, as Christians, we must remember the commands of Jesus to love one another, to care for one another, and to always remember that all humans are created equal in the sight of God. And if we are to say that we love him and believe in him, we must treat all those we encounter as if they are him.